science fiction shows things not as they characteristically or habitually are, but as they might be. And for this might be, the author has to offer a rational, serious, consistent explanation. So if we take that definition, then solar radiation management fits actually pretty well. The technology has not been physically built, but we increasingly do discuss how things might be if it could be made to work. Now let me say ahead, if I speak of solar radiation management as a science fiction, I do not mean that we shouldn't take it serious. On the contrary, I think that the stories we tell about the future can actually be just as powerful as any technology. Typical stories that we hear about solar radiation management state that climate politics is failing, that we might be facing a catastrophe, and that solar radiation management could be a last resort in case of some emergency. Computational models are relatively recent development in science theory, and they may of course be really useful as they allow scientists to experiment with assumptions and study complex systems which cannot be studied experimentally as easily. But because the models themselves become more and more complex, it also becomes more and more difficult to draw a clear boundary between what is plausible and what is not, what is science and where might be moments of fiction. Computer models thus make it really easy to envision ever more complex ways in which solar radiation management might be applied, and several studies have started to look at ideas of optimizing the climate. For example, by changing regional cloud coverage or by placing aerosol in some parts of the world but not in others. What optimization means in this context is of course up to the imagination of the scientist, and whether that would actually be physically possible is totally irrelevant to the computer. The climate model will always produce a result. It does follow to some degree physical principles, but it is not bound by the same physical resistance as the real climate. So in this sense, we can think of climate models as being part of this science fiction story that we create about global climate control and about solar radiation management. They enable us to explore and discuss consequences of a technology that currently does not exist, and that at least some technologies might even never be possible to construct in the real world. I think the analog between science fiction and solar radiation management allows two further conclusions. The first is that science fiction novels often draw a relatively detailed image of the relation between technology and society, and the climate engineering discussion is sometimes lacking that kind of detail. So maybe we should think more about the socio-technical system of SRM rather than create visions of perfect control. This would require, for example, thinking more about questions of democracy or social inequality. And I think a second important conclusion is that if we think of very early writings about, for example, space travel or computers, then it seems really unlikely that any future solar radiation management intervention will look similar to the way that we imagine it today.